Hello, everyone. How are you today on this lovely Friday evening? I'm great. Thank you for asking. How are you? What is up, everyone? My name is Caitlin J. Reeds, and today we're back with another audiobook video. We're talking all about audiobooks, all right? So, NPR posted an article in April of this year interviewing someone from Book Riot and talking all about audiobooks. So I thought, why not go through that article, read it, obviously, and then think of some of my own recommendations that I have based off of what they consider to be marks of a good audiobook. And then I'm also going to go over some things that I really love when listening to audiobooks that I did not see in that article. So without further ado, make sure you hit that subscribe button down below. Give this a like. Comment down below, what is your favorite audiobook that you've listened to? Do you listen to audiobooks? Highly recommend if you do not. All right, highly recommend. And without further ado, let's just get right into the meat and potatoes, all right, of this video. So, to give credit where credit is due, this article and this interview was written and conducted by Aisha Rasco from NPR, and the interviewee is editor Kendra Winchester from Book Riot. So without further ado, let's get started. So the example that they use first off in this article that Kendra uses is The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. Obviously that is not the audiobook narrator, but they use that as an example of the narrator capturing the tense environment of a thriller. I happen to agree. I really love The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. I have the physical copy up there on my bookshelf. Don't know if you've seen it. If you've seen my bookshelf tour, link in the cards, then you have. But The Only Good Indians is a really great example of what Kendra's talking about. And I took it upon myself to think what other audiobooks really capture the whimsy and environment that is trying to be portrayed in the book, okay? And first, we have something a little bit controversial for me, okay? Because if you've seen last video, you know that The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss was not my favorite book, not even close. And I think it's because I had so many hopes for it, and I actually really enjoyed the first half, but was severely let down by the second half. But what kept me going through this book was the audiobook for The Name of the Wind. Wow, was the audiobook amazing. It kept me captivated within the story. Plus, if you've read Name of the Wind, you know that there are lots of musical elements within this story. And the audiobook narrator does a really phenomenal job with capturing the magic and the beauty and the songs that are sung throughout Name of the Wind. And he also does a really great job with conveying the emotion that our main character, Kvothe, has, both when he's Kote, the inn owner, and Kvothe, the Arcanum student, And I really enjoyed this audiobook. Like I said, it's what kept me going through the book itself, but the audiobook was just phenomenal. So, if you haven't read Name of the Wind and you want to, I do recommend trying it, but I also really recommend the audiobook. It was an amazing audiobook. Now to an audiobook I'm actually currently reading, and I thought this was just perfect for this prompt, and that is A Restaurant at the End of the Universe by Douglas Adams. This is the second book in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and I think this one's just a little bit more immersive than that first one, and a little bit more science fiction heavy than that first book. While that first book is studied in schools, it feels to me not as science fiction heavy as the second book, and there are lots of really cool sound effects that they use throughout this to portray the different aliens and machinery, and I love that. It makes this audiobook so much fun, and the narrator of this audiobook really encapsulates the whimsy and, like I said, the adventurous, fun spirit that is within these books, and I've been really, really enjoying them. Plus, they are super short audiobooks, super short books. This one that I'm reading right now is 250 pages, so it's going to take me about 2.5 hours maybe to get through audiobook style, And I just have been really enjoying these books. So if you haven't picked up the audiobooks to The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy of the Universe, I highly recommend you do, because they are classics and they are just so much fun to read. So absolutely recommend. Something that Kendra Winchester also brought up in her NPR interview was she loves when the author narrates their own books. And for this, she chose a couple different memoirs that I'm not going to touch on just because I haven't read them personally. But I chose 3 books that are really, really amazing audiobooks that are narrated by the author. And first we have In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. That book is phenomenal. This book is a memoir from Carmen Maria Machado, and it really centers around a queer relationship and the abuse that you can see in a queer relationship. Oftentimes when we look at queer relationships in media, there isn't any representation for any unhealthy or toxic relationships, and this book is just beautifully, beautifully written. It is a memoir, like I stated, but at the same time, there are kind of tidbits of magical realism throughout the book. It's, from what I remember, a bunch of short stories that go in consecutive order, and through each of them, she personifies abuse in a different way according to the house. So as their relationship starts to decay, as, CMM starts to, go through the abuse that she does within her relationship, the house that she's in with her partner also starts to decay. And I just really, really enjoyed this book. I read it on audiobook. I read it physically. I most of the time do immersive reading, so I'm listening to them at the same time. And boy, she really put her heart and soul into this book, and you can tell. If you haven't picked this book up yet, I highly recommend it, and I highly recommend you check out the audiobook because, number 1, it's narrated by the author. Number 2, it's just a really powerful story that I feel like everyone should read, especially people from the LGBTQIA+ community. So please, if you haven't already, check out In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado, and the physical and the audiobook. Okay. Next, we have a book that I did not know was narrated by the author until doing research for this, and that is Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. And I've seen so many people recently starting to read this book, and that makes me excited. Like I said, while it's not my personal favorite in the fantasy sphere, I do prefer higher stakes. This is something that is such a great introduction to fantasy for either beginning readers or readers that are starting to get into fantasy. And since it is an independent book, independently published, he was the one to record his audiobook, and I find that really amazing, and I remember the audiobook being lots of fun, and that just goes to show you the time and care that Travis put into his work, and how much he loves and is passionate about it. So if you don't know what Legends and Lattes is, it is about an orc who decides to settle down and grow some roots, opens up a coffee shop, and just about her life, introducing coffee to this city that has never had coffee before, as she gets employees and gets a newfound love. And I really, really enjoyed this book. If you haven't picked it up already, I highly suggest you do. Not only does Travis narrate the audiobook, but this, I think, is being published by Tor soon. So pick it up before they redo it, or, I don't know if they're going to redo the audiobook, but just pick it up, okay? Pick it up if you haven't already. And the last book I wanted to talk about in relation to narrating their own audiobooks is Hood Feminism by Mikki Kendall. If you haven't read this already, highly suggest that you do. So this book is all about intersectional feminism and how different political problems or infrastructure problems, healthcare problems that we have, especially in American society, are all actually feminist issues. And it was a really interesting book, really interesting read. If you haven't picked it up, I highly recommend you do. The author, Mikki Kendall, is the one to narrate her author book, is the one to narrate her audiobook. And I just really, really, really thought that this was a great exploration of different issues that you wouldn't necessarily link with feminism, but how they are such feminist issues, and how if you really want to call yourself a feminist, you have to be aware of everyone in the feminist movement. So, if you haven't picked this up, this was super popular about 2 years ago on BookTube. I highly suggest that you do. Like I said, Mickey Kendall narrates her own audiobook for this, and we love that because you can really sense the passion and drive that she put behind this book throughout her words and her narration. And that to me is awesome. So if you haven't picked this up, highly recommend that you do. It's a really great book, and it will really open your eyes, especially if you're not fully aware of the scope of problems in this country. It'll really open your eyes to how they affect women and why they are feminist issues. So yeah, I really loved this book. Definitely should pick it up. Definitely should give it a chance. So yes. And there are a couple more things that I want to touch on myself, because the article really only discussed two facets of why they believe audiobooks are really amazing points of reference for literature, or, people trying to get into reading, people that have trouble focusing, people that can't read physically, with a book or an ebook. An audiobook is a really, really amazing option to consume your stories. So a good narration, obviously, an audiobook needs a good narration, but what does that necessarily mean? For me, that means really great pacing. So that way you can either listen to it at normal speed and the pacing is fine, for someone who listens to audiobooks at normal speed, or when you speed it up to, around 2 times, the pacing and the space between the words are still enough that you're able to understand what the narrator is saying. So that to me is a mark of a really good audiobook, something that, an audiobook that I think does a really great job of this is Michael Kramer and Kate Reading for the Wheel of Time books. I am able to blast through those audiobooks because there is really great pacing and spacing between each word. So when I speed it up, when I speed up the words, it's not like a jumble of mess all just being squished together. It's really, really nice, beautiful experience. So good pacing for me is a really big mark of a great audiobook. Sound effects, which I've talked about in this video with The Restaurant at the End of the Galaxy, another audiobook I can name that I've talked about in my last audiobook video, link in the cards, The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin. Wow. Awesome. After rereading the 5th season, they do have similar sound effects in the 5th season as well, along with Dune. The Dune audiobook, I've only read the first book out of Dune, but I remember the Dune audiobook also having some really cool sound effects. And as you can see, I was able to rattle all those off for you because they're memorable. Sound effects like this in audiobooks for me add just that extra depth of an immersive experience with the audiobook. And I just love when they do that. It really places you in the time and the setting and the scene that you're in, and I absolutely adore it. Range of deep emotion. So for me, a really good example of this was a book that I just actually recently read, and that is Daughter of the Moon Goddess by Su Lin Tan. This book, I'm getting chills just thinking about it. You need to read it. I cannot wait to talk about it in my August wrap up. It was just a beautiful book. Everything from the writing to the narrator that did the audiobook. Oh my God, phenomenal. When I say deep range of emotions, I mean deep. I want to hear the emotions that are trying to be conveyed through these words. So when the character is sad, I want a more sad inflection. When a character is excited, I want an excited inflection. When she's mad, I want her to feel mad. And you should read this book and you should listen to the audiobook, because the narrator of The Daughter of the Moon Goddess does an amazing job of just dropping you in this very whimsical, cloudy, floaty world and giving you real grounding throughout it from this audiobook. And I've really adored it. So if you haven't read Daughter of the Moon Goddess yet, please do so. And then come to my August wrap up at the end of August so we can talk about it. Okay? All right. And along with that goes a range of vocal cadences. Same type of thing. I want diversity in your voice, in your vocals. If you can't reach that, then it's probably not a good audiobook. Yeah, that's just my opinion, but I really need a broad range of vocal cadence so that way I can hear and tell when the characters are sad, mad, angry, happy, joyous, you know? That to me is super important. And then also what is super, super, super important to me, I don't see it very often within audiobooks, is a full cast of characters to represent the full cast of characters that is in the story. Quite often, I get a book that is in the perspective of a woman with a male audiobook narrator. Why? That doesn't make sense to me. If we're getting a POV from a woman, I want a woman reader. If we're getting a point of view from someone in the LGBTQIA plus community, I want the narrator to reflect that. Quite often, this doesn't happen, but I have some really great examples. First Sister and Second Hero, you need to listen to these audiobooks. I can scream about them from the top of my lungs by Lyndon A. Lewis. This has a full cast, okay? A full cast of narrators, plus the narrator, I believe, that narrates Hero is accurate representation of Hero in the books. I believe, I believe that the narrator is non-binary. I'll correct myself if I'm wrong. Next to me, I'll put up their stats. But I really loved when I found out that the cast of that audiobook really represented and reflected the characters that were being spoken of in the books. I just really appreciate that, and I really love that. Again, Wheel of Time, you have two different narrators, a man and a woman, to cover both the male and the female perspectives. I think that is just beyond important, especially just when it comes to my experience. It kind of almost pulls me out of the story for a second, especially when I'm first starting them. If I'm reading a book in one perspective and, most likely it's like a woman to male. When I'm reading a woman's perspective in a book, but it's a male audiobook narrator, like example in James Eames' books, the Band trilogy, that second book is from the perspective of a woman, but is narrated by a male in the audiobook. Best Served Cold by Joe Abercrombie. That is from one of the perspectives is a woman, but the audiobook narrator is a male. So I would just really love to see in the future more representation within audiobook narrators. Maybe that's just not financially feasible, but we should make it so. Okay, make it financially feasible. All right, make it that way. Okay, thank you. So that is this video all about audiobooks. We're talking audiobooks. While there are some really good recommendations in this, you should really check out my first audiobook video that I made because there are so many more recommendations that I have nestled in there. Okay? So, if you liked this video, give it a like, subscribe down below, comment. Do you agree with any of the audiobooks that I just talked about in today's video? Awesome. If you don't, that's fine too. We're all allowed to disagree on this channel. One of the comments that made me laugh the most was on a video from 8 months ago, right? First starting the channel, I did a cast with me for the Stormlight Archive, and someone commented, "Horrible casting." And I'm like, thank you. I'm so glad, I'm just happy that I invoked any sort of emotion out of you, that you watched my video, that you engaged with me, and I like hearing dissenting opinions. You should have told me why you disagreed. Who would you cast? But do you disagree with me? Comment down below. If you disagree and you think that there are better audiobooks than I just gave examples for, let me know down below. I want more audiobook recommendations, number one. And number two, if I've read it, those are recommendations for your fellow book readers down below. Okay? So I really hope you have a great weekend, a great Friday, and I will see you on Wednesday with another video. All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.